Welcome back to Africa 24. I'm delighted to have you back with us for another edition of the interview. Today with Cecilia Idika Kalu, CEO of Duke's Transnational Consulting, we will look at the capacity of African states to accelerate regional integration in the context of profound reform of the global financial architecture. Ms. Cecilia Idika Kalu, welcome to
Thank
Africa
you.
24. So let's get to the matter. The theme of the 2024 AFDB annual meetings is Africa's transformation, the African Development Bank Group, and the reform of the global financial architecture. A very evocative theme given the global economic crisis. In your opinion, what are the challenges for the continent, particularly in the areas of renewable energies, the fight against food insecurity, and the regional integration?
In spite of the fact that Africa's challenges are historical, we have new and evolving challenges with the world as it stands today. And Africa has to contend with these global changes that are affecting it, although many of them are from external factors. Now, given this condition, if we think about the fact that our capacity is not as enhanced as it should be to deal with many of the things that we are affected by, it behoves the ADB at this time to really, as I think of it, strategically focus on capacity building at this junction, especially considering the 60th anniversary. Food insecurity, by many indices, is getting more and more as the day goes by. The capacity to enhance production in agriculture, to improve on our import and export capacities, and for trade globally will really be beneficial. As I said earlier, the thrust of all of this when it comes to dealing with poverty and the economy and dealing with climate, as we know, it's a big issue right now. Advancing sense of our capacity, building and enhancing what we have on ground, from workforce training to technology, will be very important at this time.
All right. So, according to some experts, Africa will need around $30,000 billion a year to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. So, why do you think African countries should get the funds they need to achieve these goals?
We, first of all, putting it in summary, we need to get the funds from within and then from outside. Like the President Ruto rightly said at the ceremony today, he talked about how we do have a lot of capacity, and given the availability of development aid, still we shouldn't be in a beggarly position. We have enough human capacity, enough innovation, enough local technology to be able to support the kind of growth we want, to be able to drive revenue generation and partnerships and global collaborations, bringing something to the table that would actually help us begin to move or advance. Maybe not at the exact pace at the rest of the world, but in our own context, in ways that will meet the needs of the people. So yes, for resource mobilization at this time, we should leverage on partnerships, global partnerships, but also from a standpoint of harnessing our local resources and potential.
Well, you mentioned governance. Africa grew by an average of 4.3% between the 2000 and 2022, outpacing the global average of 2.9% over the same period. This remarkable growth rate can be attributed to high commodity prices, improved macroeconomic governance, rising domestic consumer demand, and the growing middle class. However, the underlying structure of African economies has not changed significantly. What could explain the situation?
Well, I'll connect back to the first part of the question you spoke about, sustainable development goals earlier. The indicators as encapsulated can be equated to the needs we have, globally in the sustainable development goals and articulated already. These are critical needs in Africa, maybe not all of them. But if we could look at slices that matter the most to our context, like I mentioned earlier, poverty, climate disasters, and governance that would help in security, and that nexus with climate and poverty would really be critical areas for governance issues, funding, and mechanisms at this time. So I feel like those are points that our strategy should be deployed in, not just in terms of enhancing our capacities, but strategically looking at ways in which we can focus on the SDGs that really are hitting on Africans at this time, and start from there as we advance and build on the other ones. As much as we would like to hit all at once, we may not be able to. We can look at the critical areas to us, and the indicators are already available, like you have already described.
Some experts believe that the sectoral composition of economic growth and employment in Africa has not changed since the 1990s, with agriculture still accounting for almost half of Africa's total workforce. Most countries remain highly dependent on export of raw materials and are therefore very vulnerable to the volatility of world prices and external shocks. How can this situation be remedied, in your opinion?
I'll quote Dr. Tendai at a side event Duke's Transnational hosted yesterday at this annual event, which we're really, really excited and grateful for. He talked about how the rural framework and the margin of rural development, populations that are still rural, mechanisms and infrastructure that are still rural in Africa affect governance and the measure of development we will enjoy, regardless of how much is plugged in. So why is this important? It is important because if we first of all acknowledge where we are as a continent in terms of infrastructure, in terms of our capacities, we can begin to come up with strategy that will be useful to benefit the youth and make sure that quality of life indicators are a focus and as critical as GDP and other economic indicators. Human security indicators that account for our youth bulge, account for the gender dynamics and the role of women and the kind of support that they need to leverage on their own skills will be very critical as we move forward as a continent.
This year, the FDB celebrates its 60th anniversary. What is your opinion on its track record?
Well, we like to say we look at the glass as half full and we celebrate that while we move forward. We are really, we celebrate the AFDB and we're really grateful for its presence on the continent at this time. Because the good way to look at it is imagine the economic landscape of Africa without the African Development Bank and then start from there. So even as we take account and take stock of the last 60 years, it could be a lot better. There's much more to be done. So it's not patting ourselves on our shoulders or our backs, but indeed we can say at least we're making progress. We have a good structure and mechanism to advance infrastructure in all the critical areas for the continent and its people. And for this, we'll celebrate the AFDB and we are grateful.
We are really grateful, like you said.
Yeah.
This marks the end of this interview.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Catherine, for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, here comes the end of this interview, but stay tuned to our programs.